Hey, bulls and bears, welcome back to another dose of economic reality. It is Thursday, September 5th, 2024. As usual, a lot of financial economic news to get caught up on today. Reporting to you from the left coast here of the bankrupt states of the United States of America. Got a lot to get into here. There's another black swan that not just popped up, but it's something we want to put on the radar for something that could possibly change this entire economic scene. Starting from this month to the end of October, I said those are the kind of the danger zones to be concerned about, or not necessarily concerned, but to be prepared for, right? So let's get into the news here. But first of all, when I say bankrupt United States, I'm talking about not that we're insolvent yet, because we can continue to borrow money. But when you look at the definition of bankruptcy, when you have to continually borrow more money just to stay in operational, just to maintain the current cost and payouts. For example, we have these unfunded liabilities that are in the hundreds of trillions of dollars now for the United States. So it's massive, folks. And just an example, fiscal year, we're down $1.5 trillion. In other words, we're spending $1.5 trillion more than we're taking in taxes. So this is the definition of you have to keep borrowing money, keep going further into debt just to maintain the current status quo, if you want to call it that, or the current system or the current standard of living. But if we could only spend what we actually had, this would be Great Depression 2.0, folks. So it's endless debt, but it's catching up to the citizenry of the U.S. because of the cost of living. Most people are feeling the effects of this continued money creation, continued borrowing, in other words, and printing, as many would call it here. But let's go ahead and get into it because we have a lot to get caught up on today with this economy here. And let's go ahead and start right here. Most U.S. consumers are in the paycheck to paycheck category. In other words, one missed paycheck or one unexpected expense, they're going to have to go further into debt to pay for it because they don't have the savings. We know that the savings rate is close to a 40-year low. Forbes this week, credit card debt delinquency rates rise again for major credit card issuers. So I often say here, one of the kind of phrases on this channel is it's going to continue to get worse until something breaks. In this case, delinquencies worsened again. This is just out here today, September 5th, brand new news report. Yes, it got worse. Delinquencies are going to continue to get worse. The slowdown in inflation is not helping people. It just means things are getting more expensive, but just getting more expensive at a pace slower than before. So in other words, in the 500-pound man, one of the examples I use, instead of gaining 20 pounds this year and getting to 520 pounds, he only gained 19. So now he went from 500 pounds to 519. Still not good. Still working his way towards the grave. In this case, very unhealthy and obese. The delinquency rate for 6 major U.S. credit card issuers ticked up in July. The average rate for American Express, Bank of America, Capital One, Citigroup, Discover, and JP Morgan was 1.34%, a slight increase from June, up 17 basis points from a year earlier. All right, so not alarming numbers yet. It's actually pretty low from a historical standard, but we are approaching the levels that we saw before the financial crisis, 2007, 2008. Now, why is it slower this time? Well, there's a lot more rescue programs out there this time. We talk a lot about how people are getting assistance, down payment assistance programs like never before. The student loan situation, they had to pause student loans for nearly 7 million student loan borrowers. And last October 2023, they re-implemented or restarted the payments, but it was an on-ramping situation where the payments started off at a fraction of the normal payment. Well, now that's coming back to bite a lot of the people because the on-ramping is about done. And in fact, students are going to be expected to go back to where they were and start making their full payments. Detroit Free Press. Credit score risks return for delinquent student loan borrowers as on-ramping ends September 30th. So that's not the other black swan, though, that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, but that's something else to add onto the pile of economic stressors that we see hitting in the next couple months. We have the threat of cyber attacks. We have a lot of different countries that are pretty much angry at the U.S. and a lot of these countries that are looking to go off of the dollar, the Brics nations plus, are the ones to keep an eye on here. And we've got a lot of risk out there as far as war, attacks on our grid, attacks on our financial systems, right? Things that these countries are actively, I think, looking to do. And I think it's just a matter of time. But this is another thing here. These students are not going to have a good time resuming their student loans back to where they were. Remember, it was a 1-year on-ramping period, and that should tell you the state of these borrowers, right? We have people now carrying student loan debt up in their, not just their 30s, their 40s, 50s, and even 60s. So for what many times ends up being a 4-year student loan or a 4-year degree ends up being decades of repayment. So just that alone, a 4-year degree, right? 4 years and you're done. In some cases, it takes longer, but a 4-year degree taking decades to pay off. So this is like a mortgage, a second mortgage to a lot of these people, right? Hopefully it's not as much as their mortgage if they have a mortgage, if they're lucky enough to own a home, which now it's very difficult. But if they are lucky enough to own a home, this would be like a second mortgage in that it takes decades to pay off. And in some cases, they're not even able to make the minimum payments. That's why they had to have this specialized, what they call the on-ramping period for resuming the student loans. And I don't think these students, most of these 7 million, close to 7 million students, I don't think they're going to be able to handle a normal payment. I think we're going to have to see some other, another re-implementation of either student loan forgiveness, which is being talked about on a massive scale. We have the Harris administration out there talking about that. She's also talking about a down payment assistance program nationally for homes, right? Looking to keep that housing bubble inflated. And on top of that, there's already, in every state, we already have down payment assistance programs, right? So it continues to be a propped up economy, propped up markets, the real estate market, the stock market, all propped up on borrowing and ways of manipulating the financial system in order to keep things from imploding, right? So let's talk about, though, what I see as another black swan on the horizon, or right on our doorstep would be a better way to put it here. The U.S., we are under the threat of another government shutdown. Now, some people look at that as a threat. Other people say, yeah, let it shut down. But either side of the fence you're on, doesn't matter. This is a risk. And I know most of you are saying, okay, they always pass the budget. These shutdowns never happen. Well, shutdowns have happened in many cases, dozens of times. But usually they're brief, a month or two here and there. But this one is different. This one, there's a big spending bill that's going to be, you would say it was going to be passed because they have to pass it. Well, in this case, there's something attached to the spending bill that the left-leaning people are very concerned about, and that has to do with the way that people put the ballot in November, right? It has to do with verification of these let me pick my words carefully here. It has to do with verification of the voting population. And so the people on the left side of the political aisle, they do not want this this proof that's going to be required to drop the ballot in the box, so to speak, but it's attached to the spending bill. So if they don't pass it, they're not going to get the spending bill to keep this deficit running government funded, right? So many people are saying they have to pass it. Other people are saying no, they're not going to pass it. And the time is actually approaching. The House set up September shutdown, what they're calling drama. When Congress returns to Capitol Hill, lawmakers will have to finalize and pass a stopgap spending bill by the end of the month. And while neither party wants to be blamed for a shutdown, there is that threat on the doorstep. Again, these shutdowns often don't end up being anything. They end up being nothing burgers. Or if the government gets shut down, it's for a short period of time where they shut down the parks and they shut down certain things to give the appearance that things are really changing, or shut down or shut off. So you no longer have access to go to certain parks, national parks, for example. But they'll still keep charging you for taxes, right? Certain things they won't shut down, other things they will. So it's kind of like a show, But in this case, it could be a whole different ball game if it is not passed and we see a prolonged shutdown. So we'll have to keep an eye on that for you. All right, people, let's shift gears a little bit here. I'm going to show you what Bloomberg is saying here. U.S. bank profits overcome drag by credit cards and office loans. So we know that banks, technically, they're in big trouble if you count the unrealized losses, which total collectively over $500 billion for these institutions. But when you look at profits, how much they're bringing in, not just earnings, but profits, they're up 11% from the prior quarter. So high interest rates, people going further into debt to keep from defaulting on their credit cards. It's really doing the banks good. And you have to ask yourself, do the banks have a vested interest in you going further into debt? Well, yes. And I have an example from one of our viewers here on this channel down in comments on the previous video, actually. And by the way, the previous video, we talked about how many people were cutting their cable TV. And one thing I'd like to add to that, because at that time in that report, I talked about how people were financially stressed and cutting out the wants instead of the needs or things they can get by without. And cable TV was one of those. But something I forgot to mention, a lot of people are going to these devices like Roku or the Fire Stick from Amazon, where you can get all these different apps and channels, and many of them are free. You just have to pay for, of course, the internet to access the applications and to access the views on your TV. But a lot of people are cutting their cable to go to these streaming devices, but also a lot of the streaming services are losing viewers, right? So if you didn't see that report, maybe check out our previous report. But back to the bank earnings, this has to do a lot with the way people are scraping by, and the higher interest rates hasn't caused an implosion yet, but we do know that a lot of people are getting close to maxed out on their credit cards. That's another thing I see playing out here in the fourth quarter of this year here, 2024. So a lot of risks out there, a lot of black swans, and a lot of things to keep your eye on here. But bank profits are looking good if you don't count the unrealized losses. Remember, if you count the unrealized losses, these banks are just like the United States. They're bankrupt. They're insolvent for the most part. So definitely keep an eye on that here. Let's move on, though, to retail. Macy's. And I've got some Macy's around me that have closed. Closing more stores than originally planned. Now, some people say this is another sign of consumer weakness. Other people say it's just people shopping online. And I would add to that, think about this, online shopping's been around for 20 years. I've had my Amazon account for 20 years. I've been buying stuff online for 20 plus years. So online shopping is not anything new. So if it was just online shopping causing the stressors, or the stresses rather, with these retailers, these brick and mortar retailers, why would it just be online shopping when online shopping has been around for 20 years? Anyways, Macy's closing more stores than originally planned. They announced the second quarter earnings that it would be shuttering 150 stores over the next few years, adding that it would close 55 stores in 2024 instead of the 50 stores as originally planned. So let me know what you think about that down in comments. I think it's another sign that the U.S. consumers are pulling back, and instead of shopping at Macy's, they're shopping at Walmart, at Target, and maybe even at the thrift store. That's what I think about that here. Jump over here to something else here. This has to do with the Brics nations. We know that about half of the world's population, if you look at all the population for the Brics nations, which is now 100 plus countries, either on board or getting on board with the new Brics payment system and going outside of the US dollar, these Brics nations are having some infighting, if you want to call it that. Chinese banks are rejecting 80% of payments made in the Russian ruble. So now we have these nations which are being called the Brics Alliance, but within that alliance, there appears to be some friction and some infighting, if you will, and where we have Chinese banks rejecting most of the payments, 80% of the payments made in the Russian ruble. So are they concerned that Russia also has a fiat currency just like the US dollar, right? So it's pretty interesting that these countries want to go outside the US dollar, mainly to escape the threat of sanctions. But also, when you look at the dollar, it's completely fiat currency, but all these other countries have fiat currencies as well. That's why I continue to say here that ultimately we're going to have to go back to sound currency. And I think it's going to be gold and silver backed with other precious metals, maybe even copper. We'll have to see how it works out. But I think that's years down the road. And for those of you that have been on this channel, you often hear me say, especially at the end, I say keep stacking. And the biggest thing that I continue to stack is silver, right? And I've got some cryptos and other things too, other metals, other investments. I'm still in the stock market in some stocks, mostly dividend paying stocks. But I continue to say keep stacking because you want to stack up. One, you want to prepare for what I think the black swan is going to be, some sort of shutdown, some outage where the entire financial system gets compromised, string of bank failures, right? Somebody doesn't hit the right bailout button, the money creators, right? Somebody could drop the ball on that. Something else could happen that scares the big investors that own about 90% of all stocks. That's the top 10%. When something big enough happens, you're going to see a big sell off and maybe even a freeze up of the entire financial system. So with the BRICS nations, something else to keep an eye on. And China, one of the BRICS founding BRICS members, not doing so good. Look at this here. China's consumer confidence nears all-time low, and they're calling for broader, bolder measures. China consumer confidence hit 86 in July. According to investment bank Nomura, just above the all-time low of 85.5 in November 2022. So I have to keep reminding people that this is global. This is not just the US. This is the entire world. Basically, all these countries running on fiat dollars. And what we're seeing globally with all the different nations is a continued need to go further into debt, borrow/print more money, not just the US, but globally. But then this bleeds all the way down to the consumer, with most consumers now barely scraping by, having to borrow more money just to get by. In other words, most of the population in the US going deeper and deeper in debt every month. So instead of saving money and paying off debt, most people are actually going further into debt and their savings are dropping. Not everybody, but we crossed the tipping point, which was more than 50% of people back in, I believe it was 2021, just after the stimulus checks ran out. Remember that? Before that, it was like people had a lot of savings. They didn't have to pay a lot of their payments because people got free rent and they had rental moratoriums in many cases. Payments were frozen for utilities and mortgages across the board, right? So, but that changed. The tipping point was when 50% or more of the people started going further into debt each month. And now we look at it, continues to get worse and worse each time we get the report or the update here. So something else to keep an eye on, folks. A lot of things to keep your eyes in the back of your head, head on a swivel, all that stuff here. A couple other things to wrap it up here. Let's jump into the celebrity world here. And here's a reality TV couple we've been kind of keeping an eye on here. And the reason I like to keep an eye on these things here with celebrities is because so many people look at these celebrities, the reality stars, they have these elaborate homes, these mansions, but yet a lot of times it's an illusion because we find out that they ended up just borrowing a lot of money to give the illusion of this glamorous, luxurious lifestyle. Well, here's a couple that's been in financial trouble for a while out of TMZ. Kroy Biermann, and this is Kroy Biermann, I'm not sure if I'm saying that right, former NFL player, and this Kim Zolciak. Basically, they've been on the brink of losing their home now for a couple years. Now they're going through a divorce. And what I like to just remind people here every once in a while is that money is not the solution to everything. You can be a celebrity, you can appear to have a lot of money, and you can have a lot of money, but it can be gone in the snap of a finger. And in fact, I was just talking about the divorce for this couple here. The number one stressor for relationships is financial hardships. So we see the divorce rate continuing to spike up. We see the number of people choosing to stay single and not start families. A lot more people are doing that now. What they call childless by choice and men going their own way, all that stuff here. People are afraid of the financial obligation of starting a family. And that has to do, again, with the cost of living. It all goes back to our system of money, this inflationary, never-ending running deficits from the country. And now the people buried under debt are the ones actually paying the big price because the ones running this, they end up with fat paychecks. All right. So I hope you guys like this report. What do you think about all this? The celebrity divorce, selling their home or losing their home. What do you think about what we started off with here? We started off this report with the budget deficit, bankrupt states of the United States, the bank profits, credit card delinquency rates rising again, black swan possibility with the shutdown, infighting with the Brics nations, folks. We're going to keep an eye on all of this. Please make sure you're subscribed. A very critical time to stay ahead of the financial economic curve, and come back to this channel for more updates. And we're going to keep stacking, keep you on top of the news, folks, and we're going to get through this together. Big love, everybody. Bye for now. Peace.